10. Starting off strong with a mule breeder. Out of all the things I thought I'd learn about this dude, this was not one of them. A mule breeder. George Washington loved animals. I like that. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and they are particularly important for American farmers, and so Washington made it a priority. He is believed to be responsible for creating the mule stock that supported the agricultural community in the South. But he didn't stop there, oh no. Washington loved dogs including Dalmatians, foxhounds, French hounds, greyhounds, Italian greyhounds, mastiffs, Newfoundlands, pointers, spaniels, and terriers. There's a lot. Lions, tigers, and bear, oh my. A huge dog lover, he bred hunting dogs for speed over the years and gave them cute names like Sweet Lips, Venus, True Love, Taster, Tippler, Drunkard, and Madam Moose. Weird, okay? Those are some names. Number 9, and on the complete opposite side of that, we have the Spy Master. Funny enough, Washington actually wasn't keen on becoming president and he hated being general. But the one thing he was really good at and actually kind of partly enjoyed doing was being spy master. The Revolutionary War was ill-equipped, being perpetually undermanned and undertrained and undersupplied, so Washington had to think in another way to win, so he developed a secret intelligence network. Washington had a whole ring of spies that were so good even he didn't know who they all were. They utilized invisible ink to communicate letters, they used anonymous female spies such as the infamous Agent 355, an African American double agent, a patriot tailor who spied while making clothes for British officers, and then just so many. He was more deeply involved in the spy ring than any other American general-in-chief except for Dwight Eisenhower, who got really involved in World War II, but up until that point, it was just this guy. Number 8. Fairfax. We all have a first love. Some of us are lucky enough to still be with them, others are lucky enough to find someone even better. Hopefully, this was the case when he found Martha, but his first love was one Sally Fairfax. At 27 years old, Washington had just become engaged to Martha, but that September he wrote a romantic letter to Sally. He goes on to call himself a devotee and describe thousands of tender passages between them. He speaks of destiny that divides him and her from being together, but here is the catch. Sally was the wife of one of his best friends, George William Fairfax. If that wasn't enough to keep them apart, George was about to be married, so it had to be quits. The letter itself doesn't actually openly declare love per se, but something steamy is hidden behind metaphors. We often picture Washington as the white-haired old guy on money, but at one time the dude was young, robust, and clearly love-struck.
At number 7, skilled archer. Genghis Khan wanted as many people to fight for him as possible. I mean, the guy's army was huge, and as I mentioned previously, he left a lot of destruction in his wake. When he conquered a new place, he gave some people the option of joining his army or facing the consequences, but he also liked to hire people for the unique skills. That's how one of his enemies turned into one of Khan's best archers for his army. While in battle, Khan encountered an incredibly skilled archer from an enemy clan. This archer saw Khan on the battlefield, and instead of being afraid of him, he was obsessed. He was Genghis Khan's biggest fan, although he did almost kill Khan with his arrow. The Mongols sent the enemy clan running for the hills except for the archer, who bravely marched into the Mongol camp and asked to speak to the Khan. He then explained that he was the archer who nearly shot him and that he was willing to pay for his crime with his life, though he also added that if the Khan were to spare him, he would become his lifelong servant and join his army. Now, I don't know what kind of brainwashing had to have happened for this archer to willingly join Khan's army, but either way, it's a little messed up. At number 6, body shields. When in battle, one of the most important things to have is protection. Armor, weapons, and shields are necessities when fighting opposing forces, but you know, Genghis had to go and make this concept weird. As Genghis and the Mongols entered battle after battle and conquered city after city, they would often take the opposing clan soldiers as prisoners. These prisoners didn't just sit around in holding cells though, they were put to good use. These captured soldiers would join the battle with the Mongols and were often used as human shields. The prisoners would be told to fight their best on the battlefield, and if they succeeded and survived, and the Khan deemed them worthy, they would be able to join the Mongol army. Now, I don't know what's more messed up, the fact that the Mongols were just okay with having literal human shields, or the fact that the prisoners would go through with this brutality in order to join the Khan's army. I guess it just comes down to survival, but what do you guys think? At number 5, family affair. For a long time, and sometimes even still today, marriages were used as a means to seize power and status. Genghis knew this could work in his family's favor, and so he came up with a strategy to seize power by using his own children. Genghis was known to marry off his daughters to the kings of his own allies, but it was a complex plan. In order to have the privilege of marrying one of the Khan's daughters, the king would first have to cast aside all of his other wives to make sure that his daughter was the only one. Not because he wanted his daughter to be in a completely monogamous marriage, but so that there was no other competition. The kings would then be sent into battle, and since almost everyone would die in battle, the power of the throne would be carried over to the king's wife, in this case being a daughter of Genghis Khan. This strategy worked so well that by the time Genghis died, his daughters ruled an area stretching from China's Yellow Sea to Iran's Caspian Sea. At number 4, pure vengeance. Just to give you guys an idea as to how ruthless Genghis Khan and the Mongol army were, let's talk about that one time they killed 1.7 million people just to avenge one person. We just talked about how the Khan would marry off his daughters to secure power, but that doesn't necessarily mean there was no love in the marriage. One of Genghis's daughters really loved her husband, and when he was killed by an archer, she was devastated. Genghis actually really liked his son-in-law as well, so they were both shaken by his tragic death, and they swore vengeance on the person who killed him. Genghis Khan and his army traveled to the place where the archer who killed Khan's son-in-law lived, and they wreaked havoc on every person there. The Mongols killed every person in that city. It is estimated that the death toll was around 1,748,000 people. By request of the Khan's broken-hearted daughter, every man, woman, child, and even animal was killed, beheaded, and their skulls were placed into pyramids to make sure that not a single person got away with just a simple wound. She really said full send or no send.
Number 3, speaking of slaves, we have Harry. If George was such a benevolent master, then why did his slaves want to leave? Answer is simple, because people are not objects and can't and shouldn't be owned. Harry was one of Washington's slaves and would gain popularity when he escaped Washington upwards of twice. The first time, Washington paid £1 and 3 shillings to, and I quote, advertise for the recovery of his property. Though Washington was later for the abolitionist movement, he was a shrewd businessman and knew that should his slaves be freed, the Virginia economy would be in peril. So he fought as hard as he could to keep them as long as he could. On November 14th, 1775, John Murray declared any slaves will be freed if they were willing to bear arms to the British crown. Harry ran like hell, as did many others. This time, Washington hired a slave catcher who managed to return 7 of what he determined was his property, but not Harry. He was currently serving as a corporal in the Dunmore's all-black loyalist regiment. He managed to evade him after the war, but life continued to be unkind to Harry and his wife. White settlers in Nova Scotia underpaid them and conditions were terrible. His tale sadly goes cold after he started a rebellion that got him banished at age 60 in Sierra Leone. Number 2, which brings us to it's complicated and awful. So as we know from the above, Washington owned a lot of slaves and it was really complicated. If Washington fought with the abolitionist movement and wanted slaves to be free, why did he have so many? By law, Martha nor George could set these people free. However, George put it in his will to ensure that every slave he owned be freed after his passing. Martha, his wife, made sure this happened, though it took a long time. It took until like 801 for everyone to be emancipated. However, despite this, his treatment of his slaves is still questionable. Visitors to Mount Vernon left behind conflicting accounts of Washington's treatment of his slaves. He frequently whipped and enforced hard labor, even forcing them to work 24 hours. On New Year's Day in 1789, he requested that his people work as soon as it was light and work until it was dark. He heavily relied on his people to work his Virginia plantation so that he could run a profit. In fact, this was the nature of the South, and Washington, being a businessman, knew that if slaves were freed, the economy would soon snowball. So, like I said, pretty complicated and really awful. Was he for or against slavery regardless of public opinion? If he had been given the choice to buy slaves, would he have? Who knows? But I think we can all agree that the fact that he owned and worked slaves is pretty messed up. People aren't property. And last but not least, his death. George Washington was terrified of being buried alive and ordered that his body not be touched until 3 days after his death, just in case. Throughout his life, he survived multiple near-death experiences, from diphtheria, tuberculosis, smallpox, malaria, dysentery, quinsy, carbuncle, and pneumonia. This man wasn't about to die easily. He even survived near drowning in ice and the burning and massacre of Fort Necessity. But in the end, it was a cold, something that today could have easily been fixed with some antibiotics. But instead, his doctors are really what did it. They essentially nursed him to death. They bloodletted him, removing around 40% of his own blood, for example. They even burned him. They made him gargle vinegar and molasses, which caused him to choke. It was a lot. It was actually this treatment that had the 1,000-year-old tradition of bloodletting finally called into question.
Number 10. The blade, the wife, and the horse? If you love something, you gotta let it go. Or how about parading your naked wife in front of your friends in the mighty Roman military? Emperor Caligula was so impressed with his wife's beauty, he just thought he had to share it, even though apparently she wasn't that attractive, and already had children with another man. Scandalous. If she had wheels, she'd be the town bike, if you know what I'm saying. As if displaying your wife's gratuitous curves isn't scandalous enough, apparently he would use very real threats as a strange way of flirting. Clearly this was a dude who's got some issues. Like for example, the one time he wanted to humiliate the Roman Senate by claiming to make his horse a consul. Although he didn't actually go through with it. Still though, this one's all 6s and 9s, innit? This may have been related to a brothel caught disease. He might have had syphilis, I'm just saying. Number 9. No grain. Maximinus Thrax was like most Roman emperors. Seized power when he wanted, seized land when he wanted, pretty much did whatever he wanted. Strangely enough, however, he cut subsidies for grain. This was one of the many tactics to help up cover for increased taxes. Taxes that were imposed because he had doubled the pay of the military during constant military action. That's a lot of coins needed. Eventually the people had had enough. And ironically, his own guards poked him with spears until he couldn't be poked anymore. I'm not a military expert or anything, but if you're gonna wage war, you gotta have the money for it. It's kind of like when the ice cream truck comes around and you're counting quarters for a large chocolate cone because you're 12 and life is hard and you deserve it. I love the ice cream truck. Number 8. Red Roman. Emperor Caracalla was also like many other Roman emperors, as he was quite bloodthirsty, and honestly just a bad dude. He unalived his brother Gaeta just because he didn't like him. Good reason, I guess. Then 20,000 of his brother's followers persecuted and killed. When some good folks heard about this terrible news, and were horrified, rightfully so, I mean who wouldn't be, they too were dealt with in a non-YouTube conduct safe way. He depleted the treasury from war and let foreigners have Roman citizenship. Now I know that sounds like a good thing, but it isn't. In already trying times, it completely messed up Roman societal culture. In a sense, fire is good. It allows us many things. But Caracalla threw a whole jerry can of gasoline on the fire by doing that. When your society is built on one thing, perhaps it's a good idea to not totally flip that upside down overnight, as quick decisions like that lead to quick downfalls. Just saying though, just saying.
Number 7 sparked a war. The history of North America is basically steeped in France and England, stomping over indigenous territory, playing in a game of tug-of-war, all while dealing with slavery. We're gonna get to all that later. However, Washington, being part of the Virginia militia, was a part of this. He was sent to the Ohio Valley with 10 troops to repel attacks from the French, but may have actually started a war. They had a small indigenous tribe ally with them, and they warned him that the French had a small force set up several miles away. They were supposed to be going to talk to them, but no one knows who fired the first shot, but a skirmish broke out. 10 French soldiers were killed plus 1 Virginian man, but the most notable death was that of Joseph Coulon de Villiers. He was a noble on a diplomatic mission, and his death enraged the French. They were like, we are so angry. Because of this, très fâché. Because of this event, the conflict between Britain and France escalated into the French and Indian War. This soon spread into what would soon be known as the 7 Years' War. Number 6, indigenous relations. We kind of spoke about that earlier, but here we go, we're gonna go more in depth. Despite years and years of having to endure the BS that the Europeans put them through, like smallpox, I don't know, stealing their territory, all that stuff, you know the drill, somehow they were able to create pockets of allies with Native Americans. I don't know how. Throughout his life, Washington negotiated with Native Americans, served alongside them, fought against them, and sought their lands. Like literally a walking contradiction all the time. It just looks like he just kind of did what he needed to do regardless, and just as long as it got him where he wanted to go. He respected their war tactics and even implemented some of them during the Revolutionary War. But then he would turn on them again. As commander-in-chief, he instructed armed forces to attack native nations allied with the British or those who resisted the expansion. When he became president, he followed the movement that wanted Native Americans to assimilate to their Western ideas. What? What the heck was it, man? You could fight beside them, but you couldn't respect them? I don't understand this. Number 5, dentures. By 1789, because of health and happenstance, Washington had only one tooth left in his mouth that was his. Most of his food had to be softened and chopped up into little pieces so he could eat it. It was also why he didn't smile. But the man was fitted with some of the earliest dentures and they were not comfy. In fact, they caused further disfigurement later on in his life. One of the most ridiculous and most famous rumors surrounding George Washington's dentures was that he had wooden teeth. For a long time the rumor was that they were made from the wood of the cherry tree he cut down, but that wasn't true. Though the truth isn't much better. They actually came from ivory and real human teeth pulled from the mouths of the poor and possibly his very own slaves. I will expand on that later, stay tuned. There isn't precise proof that this indeed is the truth, but there is one marking in his ledger that shows the purchase of teeth from one of his slaves. So whether those teeth are actually from, like, for his dentures, we don't know, but what else would they be for? I'm glad he purchased them at least. I don't know, that's just weird to me, man. Number 4, at 11. Washington started young. He might have been one of the founding fathers of the USA, but his history does not stand away from injustice of the time. Before he could even make a choice about it, Washington inherited slaves at the age of 11 after his father Augustine died in 1743. In his will, he left his son a 280-acre farm in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Attached to that estate were 10 enslaved people, and Washington purchased at least 8 more. This included a carpenter by the name of Kit, and by 1755 he had purchased 4 men, 2 women, and a child. By 1799, over 317 enslaved people were living at Mount Vernon, with 123 people being owned by Washington himself. His wife Martha also received enslaved people from her late first husband, and over the century and by the end of the American Revolution, the percentage of enslaved people rose from 28% to 40% because of their union.
Number 3, Senate Purge.
I am the Senate,
said Tiberius, knowing that he had a really cool name. While not the worst emperor on this list, he did purge the Senate in times of political unrest, just like everyone's favorite space emperor and one of my worst impressions. He wasn't a popular choice for the job, as he really only came to power through a series of misfortunes. All of this leads to a lackluster leader who, when he retired to an island off the coast of Italy, rewarded his mediocre work with some stuff to do with younger people that I just can't say on YouTube. Apparently, he became a heavy drinker and got himself involved in all kinds of vices. It is speculated that Emperor Caligula was a child on this island and may have witnessed this debauchery. It's speculated that this may have influenced his acts of sin, and honestly not sure what to call, as these guys are, I don't know what you call this, these guys are all messed up, man, I don't know, they're just crazy. Number 2, no holidays. Septimus Severus sounds like a brothel related disease in the Harry Potter universe. But actually, he was a traditional guy. He liked things Roman and wanted to keep it that way. So, when the Jewish and Christian faith made their way to Rome, he wasn't a happy guy. So he had them persecuted. The only thing saving these people from a short Roman sword was if they worshipped the emperor and the emperor gods as well. For some reason, that made him a little more forgiving. However, considering he wasn't the only emperor to feel this way, I would think again before decorating a Christmas tree or lighting a menorah in Rome. Of course, I'm only making humor of what probably was an awful time for those religious factions. We like to romanticize Rome, but she's not all perfect. Number 1, eye for an eye. Empress Irene of the Eastern Roman Empire may have been a woman, but was just as ruthless and bloodthirsty as her male counterparts. While a lot of people probably had an issue with her leading as a woman, I'd like to hope more people today have a problem with her politics and how she came to power. A little unaliving here, cozying up over there, playing the game until she got what she wanted. And there was this one time that she wasn't too happy with her son's politics, and it was likely he was going to have her power removed, so he needed to go on a timeout. She had some guards gouge his eyes out, which mortally wounded him. No big deal or anything. I guess there was no timeout corner back then. I went to Rome to the chief's palace. He bestowed upon me this wisdom after learning about Irene. That ain't it.
Harry and Meghan. Most recent on this list, and honestly, this whole ordeal has been pretty interesting to watch. It's rare for people to willingly leave the royal family, but based on the interviews conducted with Oprah, it isn't hard to see why they did it. The primary reason for their leaving were related to false articles being generated due to their fame, and moreover, the royal family's unwillingness to aid them on the matter. But it was clear that this was a long time coming, as Harry was frequently subjected to neglect by his father, not to mention he was the child of a previous marriage, which we will talk about that later. Meghan, on the other hand, was subjected to extreme amounts of passive-aggressive racism, and the press piled on top of that likely became too much. As much of an anti-monarchist as I am, it's hard for me not to at least mildly sympathize and appreciate their leaving. Number 9. Prince Harry's Halloween. What isn't hard to sympathize with is Harry's taste in costumes being fairly poor. Dressing as a German World War II officer, which is bad for a bunch of reasons I can't say by name but you should already know, was a poor idea, and the public made sure that was known. Now, as much as it's fun to pretend that Harry was the only one screwing up here, we can't really do that, and we have to note that the stated theme of the costume party was colonials and natives. Yeah, it's pretty bad. William apparently did also attend that one as well, but I'm certain he didn't dress in anything that similarly demeaned victims of cultural and genetic erasure. Right? Yeah, look, it's nice that Harry left the family, but as long as he bears the blood of royals, he will profit off everything that was spilt in their name. Spare will probably be an interesting read though. Number 8. The Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. This is a historical channel, so I would like to grab a few times in which the royal family went through some historical troubles. Queen Elizabeth I is one of the most well-known British rulers in history. Her life has been extremely well documented, and she's also the possessor of an interesting title, the Virgin Queen. It is claimed that she had never been romantic with anyone, though this is hotly contested, as while it's clear that she very well did not have any official children and never officially married, these are the Tudors we are talking about. There's no conclusive evidence that this ever occurred, of course, and that would become even more true as more of her reputation was based entirely on the notion that she was unwed. But dude, the Tudors, I mean, yeah, I doubt it.
Number 7. The light of my life. Emperor Nero was straight up just not a cool guy. This whole list could be about him, but I'm here to make you laugh, not horrify you with the horrors of Pax Romana. Nero, like most emperors, was very wealthy, the kind of wealth that only people who shop at Whole Foods can understand. As it turns out, there was a fire in Rome at the time. Burned for a long time, pretty big deal. Who started the fire? No one really knows, even though Nero himself might be a suspect. However, it would be really easy to get rid of a group of people you don't like if you blame it on them. So it was blamed on the hot new religion at the time. You gotta love them, Christians, except Nero didn't, and he was kind of egotistical, so in order to punish these scapegoated Christians, he had them set ablaze. So there was more light in his garden, so to speak, or that's what is said, at least. I know sometimes we can all disagree with our faith, but lighting each other on fire is not the answer. Mom always said if you have nothing nice to say, then don't light people on fire. Okay, Mom. Number 6. Not so Hercules. Commodus was like many other emperors in thinking that he was very close to the gods, but Commodus thought he was a Greek god, and reincarnated Hercules to be exact. So much so that he would often take up a role as a gladiator, which a lot of Romans thought was scandalous as a leader. A leader shouldn't be dealing with the barbarians at our gates and other lands that were persecuting and invading and taking over, rather than performing in blood sports. It was thought that this was below the office of the emperor. Rumors began to stir that because of his love for the arena, he may not be the royal bloodline claimed to be. When in the arena, his adversaries always surrendered, so he always won. In return, he wouldn't kill them, to be fair, just scarred them, as it was seen to be a good thing to be bested by the emperor and then to leave with a mark. Sure, we'll go with that. Apparently, they also brought animals in for him to slaughter in the arena for entertainment. Eventually, people had enough of him wasting time and money playing gladiator games, and he was strangled by his coach. Oh, hey coach, I'm ready for the next match. How you doing? Hey, why are you looking at me like that, man? What's wrong? And what's that rope for? Number 5. Last Best Hope. Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. History gets kind of crazy after this point, but let's be real, what's more scandalous than being the last ruler of your empire? Could he have saved it? Would the world have looked different if he did? Truth be told, not a lot of records survived his reign, so we don't really know. Perhaps it's because he didn't have much time to write things down. Or maybe because he was still a minor when he inherited the failing Roman Empire. Or really it was because Rome's worst nightmare had come true. The barbarians at the gates had taken over Rome. The German barbarian general Odoacer took over and claimed himself to be the king of Italy, which ushered in the end of the Great Western Roman Empire. Talk about scandal. Number 4. Excess, excess, excess. Emperor Elagabalus is what I think of when I think of a Roman emperor. Someone who is pampered in a time where most people don't have access to really anything easily. Eating grapes off the vine, bottles of wine, and your servants are looking fine. Alright, alright, alright. His life of decadence was also matched with the classic level of unaliving those who oppose you, or rather groups that you feel need to be persecuted. Even more scandalous than that is the question of his sexuality. Oh. While being debated by historians today, there are rumors that the decadent emperor may have been having a relationship with his male chariot driver. There's also rumors of the emperor wearing women's clothes. Very scandalous indeed, oh handsome emperor.
Number 3, Prince Philip. I have many words for Prince Philip. Words like good, which are immediately followed by riddance. Yeah, Elizabeth's husband was just about the least interested royal in even mildly disguising his attempt for anyone that wasn't a man, white, or as rich as he was. There are so many quotes, so many, they're all horrible. I don't want to say them here, I don't know if I can say them here. Like, there's taking the mask off, and then there's just being an absolute loser. I've heard dudes with the stars and bars tattooed under their breasts say the same things this mummy has said over the course of their equally worthless existences. Not to mention a similar proclivity in dating partners, as Philip and Elizabeth are cousins. Dude passed at 99, which was just about 99 years younger than he looked, and 99 older than he deserved. Number 2, the Bowes-Lyons. When Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were born as the cousins of Queen Elizabeth, they were said to have passed at birth. However, it was revealed that they'd in fact lived, but due to their classification as imbeciles, they were abandoned at Earlswood Hospital and their existence was hushed up completely. Seriously. No one went to their funerals, no one cared. The people that are the face of the country will abandon those they view as worthless for no better reason than to keep their image pure of mad blood. They were never visited, no one cared, and it isn't uncommon. JFK had a similar thing happen with his sister, except that was even hidden from him. These are your politicians, your rulers. Look at them go. Wow, look at them. Going all the way over there.
At number 10, Silver Eyes. After learning a little bit about Genghis Khan, I'm starting to catch on to this my way or the highway kind of attitude he had. Khan didn't like it when people would go against his orders, and he did not give second chances to people. If you wronged him, he would end you. Simple as that. One of the more gruesome examples from Khan's past comes from when he tried to set up a trade route with a leader of a large city. Genghis sent 500 troops to start this trade route, but the city leader had the whole caravan that Genghis sent completely wiped out. Now, as I mentioned before, Genghis Khan has a my way or the highway kind of attitude, and if someone went against him, there would be hell to pay, and boy oh boy, was there hell to pay for this one. In retaliation, Genghis and his troops went to pay this city leader a visit and ended up killing the entire civilian population of the area. Of course, he had to save the best for last and killed the city leader by having his troops pour molten silver into the leader's eyes. That's pretty messed up, not only to carry out that order, but also watch something as horrendous as that happen right before your eyes. At number 9, Noble Blood. Even though Genghis Khan was this big, scary, ruthless killing machine, he still had rules that he liked to follow. One of those rules he established for himself and his army was a rule that prohibited noble blood from being shed. This meant that when Genghis and his army conquered a new place, they would kill anyone, but they wouldn't slash, stab, or maim the nobility who lived there. But just because their blood wasn't spilled doesn't mean that they didn't get to face harsh consequences. Instead, Khan's army had to come up with new creative ways of ending the lives of the nobility without bloodshed. If a nobleman was lucky, then they would have just had their necks snapped, but this method of execution was quite rare. The army did, however, find enjoyment out of suffocating their victim to death. Imagine having to come up with an appropriate method of ending someone in just a few seconds. Before we carry on talking about the wild things that Genghis Khan made his army do, why not leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Death Toll. When you think of Genghis Khan and his spree of violence and chaos, you might think to yourself, yeah, he killed a lot of people, but you never really realize just how many lives Genghis and his army took until you really put it into perspective. Let me compare the destruction that Genghis and his army caused to another historical figure who was responsible for the deaths of a lot of people, Joseph Stalin. This man was responsible for the deaths of over 20 million people, making him single-handedly more brutal than the German soldiers from World War II. But if you think that's bad, then think again, because Genghis Khan was much, much worse. Genghis and his army were responsible for an estimated 40 million deaths. They wiped out entire cities in some of the most brutal ways you could think of. Now that's pretty messed up. Imagine being a member of Khan's army and having to basically kill anyone in sight. Can't get any more messed up than that, right? Well, maybe it can, but you'll just have to keep watching to find out.
Number 7. Princess Anne's dog. The first member of the royal family to ever be convicted of a criminal offense, and it was this one. Yeah, see, Prince Anne liked dogs and decided on April 1st that she'd take her dogs out for a walk. Before we get into the details of this, I want to make something clear. Not all dog breeds are bad by default, though different breeds require different degrees of attention and care to ensure they're probably sociable. I have to be honest, but when you're a member of the royal family by blood or leash, I imagine that people are going to have a hard time house training you. So it's no surprise that there were 2 bites that day as a result of the poor social training the dog had received. As a result, Princess Anne pled guilty to the charge under the Possession of Dangerous Dogs Act, which is a thing in the UK. Look, dogs are great. I'm a cat person. All animals need to be raised with attention and care. Same goes for people. It's pretty clear to me that the royals are equally as bad at doing both. Number 6. Edward VIII. Here is a historical doozy for you. Anyone remember the reign of King Edward VIII? No? Well, you probably blinked, because it only lasted 10 months. From the moment of his ascension, Ed Boy was clearly aiming for something weird. He was starting to get a little more open about politics, which is a big no-no in the royal family unless you're being racist, then it's okay. He also wanted the face that would end up on his coin to point in a different direction. These did actually get printed, but are super rare. He also wanted to marry a woman, but was told he couldn't, so he started getting a little annoyed and eventually abdicated the throne for love. Well, we're glad he moved on to better things, and there are no embarrassing photos of him meeting with certain people from certain countries prior to certain wars. None at all. Number 5. Princess Margaret's affairs. This isn't really much more than tabloid fluff, but this scandal was a massive pain for the entire royal family, and it was pretty clear that she couldn't care less. A whole bunch of dudes got involved in this, and it wasn't until I learned that it didn't involve Pete Townsend of The Who, but Pete Townsend of Who Cares, and guess what? Just like every single romantic relationship covered by the press, it sucked for everyone involved, but ultimately nothing all that interesting really happened at all. Number 4. Covering up Prince Andrew. It's mostly atrocities from here, so buckle up. I cannot say what was alleged to have happened with this case, but what I can say is that there's smoke, then there's fire. The entirety of Prince Andrew's existence has been one massive sham, and the fact that the royal family continues to deny knowledge of it in any way would be laughable if it weren't so teeth-grindingly frustrating. I do genuinely believe with all my heart that they knew, and they didn't do anything about it until it was going to get on their shoes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can dive down that rabbit hole yourself. You've got your rules, I've got mine.
At number 3, Victory Feast. I think it might be safe to say that the Mongols were sore winners. They really rubbed it in their enemies' faces that they had lost and that Genghis was victorious. One of the best examples of the Mongol army taking their victory a little too far comes from when they defeated the Russians in the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223. After Genghis and his troops were victorious in their battle, they decided to hold a celebratory feast. The Mongols forced the captured Russian nobility to lie down on the ground, then a heavy wooden gate was thrown on top of them, then the tables and chairs were set up on top of them, and the Mongols sat down to a feast, all while slowly crushing the Russians to death under the weight of their celebratory shindig. I mean, I can only imagine the painful screams that would have echoed through the party atmosphere as the troops sat down to their meal. It must have been a horrifying experience, or maybe their screams were like their version of a Spotify dinner playlist. At number 2, erased from history. As I've mentioned before, Genghis didn't like taking no for an answer, and just to show how displeased he was about not getting his way, things were known to get quite violent. Genghis once staged an attack, and when defeated, he asked the Xizia kingdom to send him troops, as if he was entitled to that, right? Anyways, when they refused, Genghis got really mad and sent his army to attack, giving orders to literally kill and destroy everything. The Mongol army said, okay bet, and destroyed everything that belonged to the kingdom and systematically wiped out every member of the kingdom's population. At the end of it all, the Xizia kingdom was literally erased from history. They didn't write down their own stories, so the only reason why historians know of their existence was from records of other kingdoms. It wasn't until 700 years later that their language was rediscovered, when in the 20th century archaeologists found stones with their writing on them. Even though Genghis Khan died during this battle, the Mongols were so dedicated to their leader and the cause that they carried on their mission without him, killing every person in the kingdom even after their kingdom's leader had fallen and their enemy had surrendered. And finally at number 1, buried secrets. The Mongols, though a large army, were very good at keeping secrets because after the Khan died, they never revealed where their leader's final resting place was. It was Genghis Khan's wish to be buried in a place where no one would be able to find him, and so to honor his wishes, the Mongol slaves took Genghis's body into the wilderness and buried him in an unknown location. To make sure that there was no way for them to share the location of Genghis's body, the Mongol army killed the slaves who buried their leader and threw them into the grave. They then planted trees on top of the grave to make sure that it blended in with the wilderness. But just to add insult to injury, when those troops made it back to the camp, they were also killed so that the secret of where everyone was buried really remained a secret. It's kind of messed up that these troops killed each other just to keep a secret, but clearly it worked because to this day no one knows where Genghis Khan was buried.